Hello, welcome to my first live stream. TeeTee is here. She's my assistant. She always likes to get involved and sit on any table things I make, so we'll probably be in and out of the live stream. All right, I figured I would start by giving you some updates on projects, because if I've seen things get done, get out of here. Go on, don't do that. It's inappropriate. Oh my goodness. So the biggest, most exciting thing for me right now is to finish my quilt, which I've been working on for over a year. I've been calling it the Chaos Quilt. If you haven't seen it, it's just like a whole bunch of fabrics put on top of a piece of muslin. Just all willy-nilly sewn on there. And then I put some batting inside of it, and the back is a pretty cute quilting cotton. And some pockets. And the binding is all leftover bias tape from different projects. TeeTee really, really loves this blanket. She'll actually come and sit on it a lot. Yes. TeeTee's up sniffing something. Um, so what I want to work on today is this jacket in the background that I have on the dress form that I recently adjusted and done for. It's a little wobbly, but it gets the job done. Hey, Tees. Hi, Tees. And this is the same jacket that I'm wearing. It's a pattern I made like a couple of years ago. I really like it. It's very comfortable. So I'm gonna make another one out of flannel. And I've gotten most of it finished by now. The sleeves, most of the body construction. I put the bottom collar on, and now I'm gonna attach the big facing to actually finish the neckline and the whole outer edge. Oh, but first I need to top stitch the collar, so we'll do that first. Yes. I hope my machine's not going to be too loud. Let this see. Since I'm sewing this on the outside of the garment, I'm going to use a longer stitch length, like a top stitch, because it just looks a little neater, more professional. He's gonna keep an eye on me. Make sure I don't mess anything up. when I'm sewing something like this with the seam allowance when I'm understitching something, I like to use my left hand to feel along the seam before where my needle is, so I can tell if the seam allowance is flipping in the other direction. It will prevent you from having to unpick a whole lot. Now that that is secure, and I can start pinning the facing onto it. So this big part goes along the collar. Usually I'll just fold it in half to find the center, and then I'll line that up with the center of the garment. You can also fold it and mark with a pin. And I'll straighten it out, lay it out, start pinning them together. So I'll usually work towards one corner and down one side, and then I'll go back and do the other corner. And the way that I designed this collar is that there's going to be a little gap at the end where the facing is shorter than the garment, and that's because when you hem it later, it won't be as bulky as if it was the whole way down. So it helps to make it a little lighter. With straight edges, I really just pin like, I don't know, every 2 or 3 inches. I really only use a lot of them if I'm sewing around like an arm side. And this corner, make sure everything's in there. And going down the side. TeeTee is taking a bath. She's very attentive to herself. Oh, geez, I have a whole bunch. This has been sitting on my dress form for a couple of weeks. I have a whole bunch of threads that are going to poke through the seam if I don't trim them. So I need to trim them as I'm pinning this. It'll save me a lot of heartache in the future. And because of my TeeTee cat, I always keep a thread jar handy. So I can put any long threads out of harm's way. Because if your cats eat their threads, it could be very bad. Now I can resume to now I have this all pinned. You can see the gap I was talking about between the facing and the bottom of the garment. Okay, now I'm going to do the other side, which should be fine because the first side was good, so I don't think I cut it wrong. looks like I cut this one a tiny bit bigger. I'm just going to line it up and then trim off the excess. Oh, I've got some more long threads over here that I need to cut, so let's cut those. Right. Okay, so I've got the whole thing pinned. And I can sew it. So this has a 1/2 inch seam allowance the whole way around. Um, I like to use that as opposed to 5/8 of an inch because honestly it's easier to spot your eye, it's easier to spot on a ruler. I think it just simplifies things when you're making a pattern or also when you're sewing up a pattern. I think TeeTee's gonna help them a little bit. See if he gets mad. Alright, so I'm gonna go the whole way around from end to end at 1/2 inch. I believe TeeTee won't get too mad at me here. Yeah, like 3/4 of the way through. This is like the longest part of this jacket is sewing all the way around this. At least, well, the longest machine part. Because I attach it by hand and that takes, I don't know, like 2 or 3 hours sometimes. Whew, okay, I finished. Okay, now we've got the next one. Before I turn it, turn the corners. Otherwise, I won't be able to make a point with the color. I just like to shear off the top corner. Close, but not too close to the sleeve. I'm also going to do a couple of bits of color so it lays flat, because it is slightly curved. Or just cutting like a little triangle into it. Then I can turn it. Like the different corners. Perfect. Okay. So now I'm ready to press it, and then I have to top stitch the whole way around. The next part of finishing this. But now that I have the seam done, at least it's kind of protected, I think I'm going to move on to doing the sleeve cuffs, because this is the next part that's really unraveling. That's going. I want to prevent any more of that. And this part's kind of fun because the sleeves actually have a couple little tucks that are on the back side of the sleeve, and I don't really have those um, planned out in the pattern yet, so I just kind of do them on the fly whenever I make this jacket, so that's always kind of fun. And I'm hoping this time to settle on the final placement so that when I make the pattern, I'll know where I want to put the tucks. And I think I need to gather in about 1.5 inches using the tucks. I'm going to do 2 tucks that point towards the back, like this sleeve, so it'll create some volume. And then it's still wide enough that you can like roll it up, push up the sleeves if you need to. It's something I like to do a lot, so I always make sure my sleeves are wide enough for that. And then the next thing I have to do is for pockets, which I'm excited about because I get to use Jenny for that instead of putting the jacket on and trying to like place the pockets in the mirror. Use my dress form, so that's gonna be fun. Will be the first thing I would really use her for. So those pieces have my sleeve cuffs, 2 sleeve cuffs, and I'm gonna sew the short ends together first to make the actual cuff, and then I'm gonna fold them out. I'll just do that really quick right now. Put a couple pins in. TeeTee is now sitting on my ironing board. She really looks anywhere. But this is no. So when I do two little pieces like this, they're kind of a set. Um, it saves thread and time if you just like after you finish the first one, you just pull it, like an inch out away from your presser foot, and then start sewing the next one. And we'll end up being chained together. So if if this is the last thing you do when you're working on a project one night, then they're kind of stuck together and harder to lose. And then you could know like, oh, these are the sleeve cups and not something else in a more complicated pattern. Plus, it's fast. I think I have to shoo TeeTee off of the ironing board so I can make my iron hot. He won't be in danger. It'll be fun. Okay, so I've got my two sleeve cups and they're hanging out together. Let's set those aside. Now I'm going to work on making these little tucks in the sleeve cup while my iron gets hot. So I found my sleeve, the back end of my sleeve is here. So I'm going to make a couple little like 3/4 inch tucks. And I'm going to fold them so they're pointing towards the back, not getting in the way of my seam. I'm also trying to layer them so they'll kind of be right next to each other. This takes a little bit of figuring out. Pin those in place. Okay, so I've made like two little tucks in the sleeve cup. Okay, so before I stitch these down, I'm going to make sure that I took enough, or I should say I took the right amount out with the tucks. So I'm just going to fold one of these sleeve cups over, put it onto the sleeve, see if it fits. And I think this might be too, I think I might have to take more in. Right side. I have to make my tucks a little bigger. It's part of the fun. Make them a little bigger, and I'm going to add a third tuck. Just make them a little more. Might be a little small. Either my sleeve is just way too small, or the back. Oh, thank you. I really have to do a whole lot more gathering than I remember. Try this now. Okay, all right. I think that might work. All right. I ended up doing 3 tucks that are a little wider than I was originally thinking, but that's okay. So now I'm gonna baste them in place, just by sewing across the top, like at about a 1/4 inch. That way it'll be hidden within the seam allowance, and I won't have to unpick it later. This first one's going to be interesting because I'm sewing like into the folds. So I'm going to have to use a needle or a pin while I'm sewing to like hold them down and make sure they don't flip in the wrong direction. Last tuck, I'm almost there. And threads. Put my tucks are sewn into place. I'm going to take my cuff piece and I'm going to press my seam allowance flat. I'm going to fold it in half. Line up the top so I make sure everything's even. Bunch up somewhere. Then as a full cup, I'm going to slide it onto the sleeve. I'm going to line up the seams. Line the seam of the cup up with the side seam of the sleeve itself. But I only want to sew one layer of the cuff to the sleeve at this point. So I'm going to kind of peel down the outer layer of the cuff and open the cuff back up. And now I'm going to just pin the side of the cuff that is closest to the sleeve itself, right sides together. And I'm going to pin the whole layer on the cuff and do the first stitch. And this way, when I finish the second stitch, I'll fully enclose the raw edge and it won't ever fray. I'm stretching the cup a little bit just to make everything fit nicely. I'm going to make sure I pin, even though I did a little stitching, I still have to make sure when I pin the tucks that they're facing the right direction. I'm going to put a pin in each tuck to make sure they stay in place so they don't slip. Okay, this last one kind of came undone, so case in point. Alright, now I've got my cuff sewn on. Attached, I mean, now I have to sew it on, and this is one of the harder things. One of the steps about making like a woven jacket that I don't like is doing that final sleeve cuff because it's so small and you can only sew like maybe an inch or an inch and a half at a time before you have to like rotate the cuff and stop sewing. So it's kind of tedious, and there's definitely been a few times where I've sewn like the sleeve shut accidentally. So I try to be really careful when I do this. Yeah, so I'm going to sew it at a half an inch with the other seam allowances, which is half an inch. Basically, each time I get to a needle, which I put about every inch and a half or so, I stop and I rotate the cuff. Check, make sure your layers are all there. For the rest of the cuts out of my layer, cuts are going in the direction. Almost back at the start again. Now I'm going to be sewing over the cup. I want to check to make sure they're also where they're supposed to be. They are. Make sure I got the rest of the cup out of the way. Okay, home stretch. Also, I'm using a needle to hold down the open seam allowance when I start going over it so it stays in place and keeps my fingers out of the way. One little rotation. Done. Stitch for security. Try to cut all these threads at once. Okay, so now the sleeve cuff is attached. We have to finish it. We fold it back up. These threads clip in through here. Trim those. So now I'm going to fold the cuff back in, fold it down inside itself. Make sure that it's even. Across. Not crooked. Okay, so now this part takes a little bit of finagling. You want to make sure that your seam allowance is pointed up towards the cuff, and then you're going to take this inside layer of the cuff and you're going to fold the bottom edge of it up about half an inch. Just going to do it with your fingers and then check that it lines up so that the fold of this inner layer is just underneath the stitching that you make. Because when you sew it, you're going to sew it like on the cuff, to attach it. And this way, if you ever like roll your sleeves up or something, the stitching won't be visible when you do that. So you can also, like, if this is too difficult, before you fold this in, you can go and press this edge in 1/2 inch. I don't know, I think it's kind of fun to feel it out with fingers and fold it in as you go. So I'm folding it in again, and I'm going to make sure that my inner raw edge is actually like hanging down below the seam. So that way I know that I'm not, losing it. Alright, so I'm going to start folding it in under, just kind of like smooth everything out and see where it lands. So I'm a little short, so I'm going to just roll a little bit more of that in the fabric. Straighten out my fingers again. Okay, that feels good. Okay, gotten this to a nice place. I'm going to pin my first pin, and like really the first fold is like the hardest. After you start folding it, the fabric just wants to like follow the way the rest of it's going, so it's a lot easier to just start folding it under, lining it up, making sure you're gonna close that raw edge. And I'm still doing like every 1.5 inches or so. I think any more than that would be kind of a pain, and any less than that, it would be the fabric would be slipping around. I'm like halfway through pinning stuff. Probably gonna finish this sleeve cuff and top stitch it, and then I'll probably be it for today. Okay, I think that's it. Oh wait, I'm gonna put an extra little pin here. Part of it wants to come flopping out. So I'm also gonna just like inspect inside the sleeve and make sure that everything looks good. See if there's anywhere here. This was a little short, so I need to rethin this. See if there's anything that's trying to get pulled outward. Okay. Okay, so I'm ready to sew it. And again, because the stitch is going to be visible on the outside, I'm going to use like a top stitch. So my normal stitch length is 2.5 millimeters, and I upped that to 3.5 when I top stitch. It just looks a little nicer, a little more professional, which is always nice because it kind of disguises your homemade clothes, so they're more handy. Tucked in here, and a little bit of some of the fabric trying to roll out. Just a couple more pins to go. I know that that's the seam intersection here, so my machine might not want to go through it. I'm gonna try to pull it from the back to give it a chance to make it a little silly. Home stretch last rotation. I'm a little worried that I missed it in a couple places. We'll have to see how I did. No, I think it's good. It's on. We've got a sleeve cut. It's got trim some of these threads. Okay. So yeah, it's a nice sleeve cut. It's got the little tucks in it to give it some volume and shape. And I'm really excited to do the second one and have this jacket regular. I've been working on it for a couple of months. I keep setting it aside for other things like the dress form and the quilt and doing some patterns. So it'll be nice to finally have this done. And for now, I'm trust it to Jenny. But that's okay. Anyway, thank you for joining me. I hope to do another one of these in a couple weeks before the end of September. Um, so yeah, be on the watch for that. Thank you so much and have a good night.